But I mean, is Josh acting right in there?
Primary sources. I actually enjoy looking for them, and I kind of order in that sense that I have like a collection. I'm always looking at primary sources with the thought of thinking like, how can I implement this to use this in my classroom? So anytime I see something that's snagging, I save it for later. But I created a waitlist that actually has some of my go-tos. Where you won't have to maybe fish as much, where there's sorts that have been curated by themes or topics. So before we go there, I thought I'd share Word Washington's team. This is the cool thing about having access to. So people used to say that teacher walk. We have right? He had actually, by the time he became president, he had 1 tooth left. And he suffered a lot of pain. His face was disfigured because of it. The guy who made his hippopotamus ivory, he carved his teeth and he left 1 spot open for that 1 tooth that he had. So then we had a real tooth in there. He was imagine or the what that would feel like to be wearing something like that. And he was a very vain man. So, it was important for him to have something in his mouth as a teeth. But anyway, I'm showing you this because kids love this kind of stuff, right? And a lot of them will tell you, oh, what is that? Right? But primary sources, objects, we have multiple sets of things. The only cool set that exists today is that Mount Vernon was at home. But you can go to the Mount Vernon website and they have wonderful interactive things for your students to do. You can actually take a virtual tour of Mount Vernon. And they have wonderful first class videos of a lot of the things that David talked about. So anyway, just wanted to share that. So on the Wakelet, again, if you're not familiar with Wakelet, it's just a site that curates the colleges. I'm going to put on here seat reading inquiry because I know you're going to be working with Kate on that. I'm not going to click on that because she's going to go, but there are lessons here. When I first learned about inquiry, it took me a while to grab my head around because I was used to traditional lesson plans where you kind of have like, it's not so much inquiry, right? It's more lessons, activities. So I found it very helpful to actually look at what other teachers have, how they have written inquiries for me to kind of grasp the concept. I did some of here, but that's part I love my thinking routine. This is a Harvard Project Zero, and they now work with us in books too. And try whatever you want them to do. All right, so you can just click on reading routine, that primary source. And so that is there for you, the Bible is there. Another, we would set it 100 times a day, Library of Congress. They also have solutions. So let's say you want to make something on paper and you can have to figure it out. And so they want to come to all the minutes for you. That you can download all of them probably that are on this set or transcribe. So you don't worry about it's not, today they can't really read cursive as well. But you can minutes, and you can just, again, dig into the whole Library of Congress collection. You can go right into the library site source. So that's one thing you want to show you the Library of Congress and then you need. The other thing I wanted to show you here, I'm going to this one. This is from all kinds of places that you can be in dark to pull up. So when you go here, is the public library of here. Again, they have a guide here. And they pulled up the file in June last time and yesterday. And so today we have sensors related to the project. And we can go in and find out, look at the object, look at the document, read a little bit more about the lessons to go with some things. So it's not hard work. And you can also research on that. And you'll get all kinds of things from now, from public library, so you'll get from different sites, from using photography, to different tools, one site that you go to. Another one I really like. Oh, this is not teaching. This is a really good one to go about each. This one is activities that you can do with your students. So the particular one is involved in the time jam thing. I have done that you get to pay for the time jam or who want to be. And they use this as a partner, and you talk about and so you can start with activities. Start. And then you can flip it.
It's down at the bottom. Analyzing the cotton gin patent, is that what you're looking for? Right under the purple activities that use this document?
Oh, here. So if you go this week, you have to be the CP under review and analyze that. So this docs one so that's one these are all recent. Then we start looking at your lessons, you just go here and access the folder. There's a lot more information in there. David had given me some links, I think lots of rights, so I just. I don't have it, I'll leave you some rights in it, but, okay, that's worth reading with the things. You ready?
We're ready.
All right. Who goes next? You?
It's a good question. It's just an excellent question. David.
David, you're on. Okay.
Do you ever use the view of things?
Yes,
Yeah.
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 That is a good one.
David, is your slideshow somewhere in this folder?
I think it's in my folder.
Okay. Is it Revolutionary War in the West? Is that what we're going to? All right. I don't know how you got to these though.
All right, so this is gonna be my last time with you all today, and I just wanted to take the opportunity to say how much I enjoyed working with you and talking with you and interacting with you, seeing how you're incorporating all this material. And if you do have any follow-up questions at all, you can feel free to reach out to me at the Citadel. My email is pretty easy to remember. It's David Preston at citadel.edu. So again, I've really enjoyed the time with you. And just to underscore that point, I received a question from Randy earlier today, and it's just a brilliant question that I'd like to use to start off our afternoon session, which will again return us to the subject of Kentucky, Native Americans, and American settlers. So Randy asked, was the fate of Native Americans inevitable, or were there avenues for different outcomes? That's a great inquiry, isn't it? And this is a question that I talk about with my students whenever I engage in this material. It's a question that I talked a lot of, or thought a lot about in my research. And I'd like to, well, let me just throw that over to you. How would you all respond to that question? I'll read it again. Was the fate of Native Americans inevitable, or were there avenues for different outcomes? Any thoughts? It's a tough question, isn't it? Okay. Okay. It would take some give and take negotiation. You're saying that there were different outcomes.
Understanding on the side of people coming in,
Okay.
the similarity between them and people.
Yeah.
That they recognize this as one of human beings.
So, we talked about the French a little bit, right? Let's play this kind of flooding game. If the French had not lost the French and Indian War 7 years ago, and let's say that New France continues as a colony, well into the 1700s. What that's going to mean is that native peoples out here in the Ohio Valley, like the Shawnees, they're going to have another power to ally with. And we saw that the French they were pretty good with their relations with the natives. Again, out of necessity, they needed the Indians. The Indians needed the French. So I would offer to you that, you know, one of those avenues for different outcome might have been if the French had somehow managed to hold on in North America. And so what we can then say is that that's a crucial turning point for Native peoples. When the French do lose the 7 Years' War and they're kicked out of Canada, and then the Indians in this region lost their ability to ally with the French, who have generally been supportive of Indian territories and claims in this region. So that's kind of, you can identify the key turning points. Now, how do you think that Americans like 100 years ago would have answered this question? Would they have said that it was inevitable? Most likely. And they would have said something like, well, like the painters of those Daniel Boone paintings, and they said, well, hey, of course it was inevitable. We were bringing civilization and Christianity and progress, and industry and farming to the West. Look at how we made the world better. I don't think it's my response. My short answer here is I don't think it's inevitable in that regard. And I'll give you a few kind of counter examples. The last time I checked, the United States was defeated in Afghanistan by Taliban fighters fighting guerrilla style that are completely outgunned by our forces. They don't have the same technological communication advantages that our forces do. The United States still lost that war. The United States lost Vietnam against apparently militarily, technologically inferior opponent. So I offer those as examples to say that just because you have more people, more guns, more firepower, it doesn't always mean you win. Another recent example we talked about table is Ukraine. Russia has more tanks, more jets, more artillery, more everything, more soldiers, but somehow Ukraine has held on, right? So all that to say, I think there are avenues for different outcomes. I do think as well that the window for those possible outcomes is becoming smaller and smaller as we go through the 1700s. I think the options begin to dwindle for natives in this region. One of the reasons I think that those options dwindle is because of numbers. Think about this. During our great the population of Kentucky, the Anglo population of Kentucky in 1790 was something like 70,000. And, or sorry, 1770, 70,000. By 1800, it's over 200,000. And that is Kentucky's population alone is dwarfing the native population of like the whole area of the Mississippi River. So numbers do matter in that sense. But I do think that there are different outcomes that are possible. And I really think that question is right on target. One of the reasons that AIS outcomes, the possibility for different outcomes narrows is the American Revolution, as it is fought here in the Western frontier. You know, when we talk about the Revolutionary War, it's kind of a tale of two wars. You know, you have the war in the east along the coast. You have Bunker Hill, Lexington and Concord, Yorktown, and all these like big battles between the big armies, things like that. And that seems to be like where the real war is happening. Because a lot of historians don't emphasize enough the war that's happening out here on the frontier. And part of the reason that it doesn't get a lot of attention is that it's a far different kind of war. It's more destructive, it's more inhumane. There are lots of small scale attacks like we learned about yesterday, where settlers are being killed on both sides. There's some outright atrocities that happen in the Revolutionary War out here in the West. So for all those reasons, it's not a topic that gets a lot of limelight, but you have an opportunity to build in this part of the Revolutionary War story to your classes. So I want to kind of pick up a little bit of backstory here and maybe kind of tie some knots into what we previously learned. So after the French and Indian War, as we just discussed, the French are gone now, and the British have occupied, or at least claimed, the area east of the Mississippi River and south of the Great Lakes. And on day one, we walked through the speech of a Shawnee leader named Nehemia. He spoke these words in 1768. He went through that part of that speech. It was very close. What he wanted was for the British to basically be like the French. Don't build all these forts and don't bring settlers into the region. We're happy to trade with you, just like we traded with the French. But don't come in here with army troops trying to occupy our lands. And the British didn't listen. And what Nehemia was specifically responding to was the negotiations taking place for this treaty called the Treaty of Fort Stanwix. Fort Stanwix is located in New York. And it's a very controversial treaty. If you see the line marked in red, this treaty basically opened up a huge swath of territory in the Ohio Valley to British settlement. Notice that this comes on the heels of the famous Proclamation Line of 1763, which supposedly forbade colonial settlement west of the mountains. The British never really intended that to be a permanent thing. And in 1768, they approved this treaty. And it basically opens up what is today Kentucky to colonial settlement. And think about the timing here. back to Daniel Boone. When was he first come into Kentucky? 1769, 1 year after this treaty's finalized. No coincidence. What makes it controversial is not just the extent of the treaty. It actually ends at the mouth of the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers, to give you a sense of the sheer location. One of the reasons it's controversial is that the Iroquois Confederacy, the Haudenosaunee, that were very powerful and dominant as a native group in this region. They basically claimed that they could cede this land to the British, even though there were a host of other Indian nations living in the Ohio Valley at the time, the Delawares, the Natives, the Shawnees, and many others. And so when Nipmuc gave this speech, he was not just ticked off the British, he was also angry at the Six Nations, the Iroquois Confederacy. Because in his view, they were threatening to basically pull the rug out from under the Shawnees. And because they were more powerful than the Shawnees, they're going to cede this land that they're living on and hunting on, farming on to the British. So it's very, very controversial. But the treaty stuck, and settlers do indeed begin to flow into the region. Back to this inevitability question. People are thinking about this question even in the 1760s and 70s. This is one of my favorite examples. So here's the Virginia Gazette, the Virginia newspaper, 1773. And somebody, an anonymous writer, sends in this, it's kind of like an op-ed. It says, a friend to the true interests of Britain in America. And this writer's basic point is that the British government should, instead of trying to kind of control and tamp the brakes on colonial settlement, that they should be, opening the floodgates. And the key part of this, which I zeroed in on here, is a very interesting comment. This is about, well, we'll just read the whole thing. He says, these impolitic addressers admire the Northwest for not agreeing that a settlement should take place in on the beach of British Columbia. Little do they know that not even a second Chinese wall, unless guarded by a million of soldiers to prevent the settlement of Europeans on Ohio and its dependencies. So here is a Virginian who clearly is saying our expansion westward is inevitable. And if you want to try to stop it, you basically have to build a second Great Wall of China and plot a million soldiers on the Appalachian Mountains to stop us. It's very interesting commentary on what we're talking about. And the settlers and hunters, like Daniel Boone and Abraham Lincoln, grandfather, they did come in large numbers. By the 1770s, there's probably about 40, 50,000 Anglos in the whole Ohio Valley, going all the way up into what is today Pennsylvania. Even on the eve of the American Revolution, there is a war called Dunmore's War, named after the fellow pictured here, Lord Dunmore, he was actually the last royal governor of Virginia. he, well, he basically took the advice of that newspaper writer. And he leads an expedition to, the Ohio Valley to basically punish the Shawnees for some of the ways that they were resisting and fighting back against this influx of hunters and settlers. So they're hunting and agricultural. The outcome of the Fort Dunmore's War is that Virginians are successful in reaching Shawnee country. So if you look on the map here, they advance all the way into the Scioto Valley in what is today Ohio. They destroy some towns, they negotiate peace with the Shawnees. But the outcome is basically to solidify Virginia's expansion into the lands of Kentucky. That's the key outcome. So this war is really crucial in shaping the future of our region here. And while that was happening, a year later, the first shots of the Revolutionary War were fired in Lexington. This is an engraving of the Battle of Lexington, by the way. And as I mentioned earlier, this is the exact reason why this early settlement in Kentucky was named Lexington. So, question is, how did Native peoples respond to the American Revolution? What did they make of it? It's very interesting. A lot of the first Native reactions as they hear this news is they call it a brother's war. They see it as a civil war between the British. And that's what it really was, if you think about it. And they said, since this is a brother's war, we shouldn't have to play any part in this conflict. You guys fight it. And a lot of natives tried to remain neutral at first in the Revolutionary War. Over time, however, the British, for their part, and the American revolutionaries, they become more desperate for military help, for assistance. And so they increasingly start turning to the Native Americans that they are in relationship with. And start to kind of ramp up the pressure for them to commit to one side or the other. So by 1777, 78, the frontier is basically increasingly a war. I'll give you a few examples here from this map. Of how natives responded. In South Carolina, the Catawba Indians, they are a smaller nation that is among the South Carolina settlements. They decided that the best course of action for their nation to guarantee its independence in the future is to ally with the United States. Same for a group in what is today Western Massachusetts, the Stockbridge Mohicans. They're still there, by the way, in Western New England. They allied with the United States, and some of the first troops that show up in Boston and George Washington's Continental Army are Mohican warriors from Stockbridge. The powerful Six Nations, the Haudenosaunee Federation. Interestingly, that nation ends up splitting into kind of a civil war of their own because of the American Revolution. 4 of the Iroquois nations will side with the British, but 2 of the Iroquois nations, the Oneidas and the Tuscaroras, will become allies of the United States. And again, they will commit warriors and forces and supplies to the Continental Army. The Oneidas in New York today, they are very proud of the fact that they were one of the first Indian nations to militarily and politically support the United States. They're very proud of that fact. In the West, how do you think nations like the Shawnee are going to respond to the revolution? Do you think they're going to side with the United States? Will they side with the British? Why? Any thoughts?
Conflict with, or they not being allied with, then we're going to.
Okay, so there could be some complex factors at work here that the Shawnees might be concerned about some of their traditional rivals or enemies and how they're addressing this question. It's very good. Any other thoughts on how the Shawnees respond? Why might they see the British as a good bad? Okay. Okay, they might see they might be thinking of British armies might and think, wow, there's no way that these rebels are going to defeat the British army. It's possible. Yeah. Okay. The British are basically the lesser of 2 evils for all of these reasons. The British at least had a kind of commitment to looking after the Indians' land rights. So out here in the frontier, the Great Lakes region, Ohio Valley, the British are going to gain a lot of support. In fact, here's kind of like a rule of thumb. Most of the Indian nations who commit to fighting in the Revolutionary War do so on the side of the British. Again, there's a few examples of nations that side with the United States, but most, again, see the British as the lesser of 2 evils. Several years ago, I had it was a real honor and distinction being invited to speak about this particular treaty. It's a very historic treaty between the Delaware Indian Nation and the United States government. So this treaty is significant in that it's the very first official treaty between the United States government and a Native American nation. And it's the Delaware Nation. Now, this relationship still exists today. That's how the U.S. government characterizes its approach to Indian nations. It's called a nation-to-nation relationship. And so for Native peoples, these agreements, even though they seem old to us, they are still very much important and real time. So that's a very historic first. This treaty did not end well for the Delawares, sadly. The Americans, in this case, wanted the Delawares military support. They wanted their They wanted their supplies to help support the Continental Army in the West. And the Delawares fulfilled their part of the bargain. But unfortunately, some of the key Delaware leaders, including this guy, the Americans referred to him as White Eyes, but his Delaware name was completely Gecko. I had to learn how to pronounce that, by the way. Delaware speaker. He was unfortunately killed by American militia. Like they basically murdered him. And that is an example right there of what this war in the West was like. There was a lot of intense hatred back and forth. Natives hated the settlers, the Americans, as you see here in this case, hated Indians. So it was a very vicious war. When I spoke at this event, it was really amazing. It was a really amazing recreation of the actual treaty. And this was done at Fort Pitt and right in downtown Pittsburgh, on the site where the treaty had actually been negotiated. And what made it even more incredible was the fact that there were Delaware tribal representatives who came, and they not only watched, but they were participants. So this Delaware speaker that you're looking at right here in the center, believe it or not, he's actually a descendant of Kukwait-Gecko, White Eyes. And he was speaking the words that his great-great-great-great-grandfather had spoken in 1778 in the Delaware language, the Lenape language. And it was absolutely incredible. It was, when I was standing there watching it, I realized this is the second time that these words have ever been spoken on this location in the Lenape language. I'm going to see if I can play it with focus. Hear that a little bit? He was basically speaking words right from the actual minutes of the treaty. Really amazing. I wanted to show you some of these pictures that I took. Part of this will build towards what Connie's going to talk about later, and that's the use of these wampum belts as the essential ingredient of any type of diplomacy that's happening in the 18th century in this region. You know, today, if you want to have diplomacy between two nations, what do you need? Ambassadors, embassies. There's like an official network, right? Department of State. This is what you needed in the 18th century if you wanted to conduct diplomacy with any native group in this region. So they had the wampum belts reconstructed. The American delegate or official who was leading the negotiations for the United States. At one point, he presented a belt of white wampum with 13 United States and the Delaware Nation lying full of the sea with their hands ciphered in black font, meaning the purple beads. So I don't know if you can see the belt, especially on the shaded side. You can see kind of like these human figures that are linked together with their hands. So there were 13 human figures representing the 13 states. And then the purple one at the end was the Delaware Nation. And here is blanking on his name. He's an enrolled tribal member of the Delaware Nation today. And obviously you've heard him speak the Lenape language. And his clothing here was reconstructed courtesy of an inventory of his goods that survived from the Revolutionary War time period. So, to kind of wrap this up, the Ohio Valley during the Revolutionary War becomes what one commentator at the time referred to as a dark and bloody ground. It was a war where natives were sending out war parties and attacking American settlements. It was a war where American militias were going out and attacking native war parties. Anybody live near Blue Licks
Needs to have
Battlefield State Park? Northeast. Okay. One of the examples of these types of really destructive small-scale battles was the Battle of Blue Licks, fought in the year 1782. Here at Kentucky. This is a battle between American militias, including Daniel Boone, his son, Israel. And they ended up being ambushed by the British and Indian force, lots of shamans in the mix. And Boone and the Americans are actually defeated in this battle. It came at a huge personal cost to Daniel Boone in the form of the loss of his son, Israel, who was killed. But this is an example of one of these frontier battles that really characterizes how ferocious the Revolutionary War was in the West. When the smoke settled in the year 1783, there would come to be the other bookend for time together. The revolution had sealed the Americans one very important. And that outcome was sealed in this treaty called the Treaty of Paris of 1783. The British in this treaty ceded to the United States of America all of its claims for lands east of the Mississippi River and south of the Great Lakes in Canada. And what this meant was that the future trajectory of the United States was in a way set. The United States, not Britain, now claimed ownership of these lands west of the Appalachians, south of the Great Lakes, and east of the Mississippi. No Indian nations were represented at the Treaty of Paris, or even really considered in terms of their ownership or their land rights. So the Treaty of Paris' key outcome was solidifying the United States' claims of possession to the Trans-Appalachian West, including Kentucky. You can see here that this treaty is not going to solve the problems between whites and Indians to the frontier. And again, in part because the natives weren't consulted in this treaty. Fighting will erupt again, even though the war is supposed to be over in 1783. Fighting and skirmishing continue into the 1780s and into the 1790s and into the early 1800s. It's not until the War of 1812 that native military resistance to control their lands and their independence finally comes to an end. One of the casualties in ongoing fighting, as you might have learned yesterday, is the grandfather of Abraham Lincoln, I guess senior, if you want to call him that. He was killed at his farm in the year 1786. That's 3 years after there's supposed to be a peace treaty. So, where I'm going to stop, I think I'm 5 minutes ahead of schedule, maybe even 8. It's supposed to end at 1:15, right? So I'm like, you witnessed another miracle. So I'm glad. You know what it's saying is that the victors write the history, right? And such is the case here too. Very important work in the history of Kentucky is John Phillips's 1784 book entitled Discovery, Settlement, and Worship of Kentucky and ethnic works of monarchy and natural history that work country. So Phillipson here is relating the history and dare I say the inevitability of how all this came to be. And he particularly highlights, as you can see there, Daniel Newman as like the key actor in this whole sequence of events that has brought Kentucky into possession of the United States. And of course, we're just a few years shy of statehood in the 1790s. So, do you want to?
I want to ask a question.
Sure.
So, now when we print books, there's the page that has like who the printer is at the front, that page is there. When obviously people couldn't print like single page things on their home printers at home. Was this thing at the bottom of where it was printed and by whom and what year? Was that like a pretty common thing that was included on documents?
Like the publisher.
Yeah, like the actual print shop where they like put the little letters in the box and rolled out.
Yeah, that's the title page of the volume right there.
But was it like that on documents too, since?
Most of it for pamphlets and books, absolutely, like they would always include the place and the printer and then the year. So that's
Yes,
the
really?
Chicago style.
Oh.
ALA, MLA.
I'm gonna bring you up children's book to look at, and we'll just have to take like lots of turns, and understanding that makes this book like so much more sense. Which it didn't at the time, but now I kind of get it. Okay, thanks.
For sure. Any other questions?
It's such a good book.
I hope this helps, kind of bring everything full circle here. And tie together some of the things we've learned about the Shawnees and Daniel Boone and the West and how all of these forces kind of come to a head here in Kentucky. So, thanks for your attention, and I'm gonna turn things over to Connie.
Could you explain how to make the beads?
Oh, yes,
Just to
okay.
set us up,
Will do.
tee up the ball.
Okay. So Connie is gonna do some really fun activities with you concerning Wampa. And, just to refresh your memory, this is the diplomatic language that Indians speak to each other and to their European counterparts. As I mentioned,
I've never seen
this is the guarantee of truth. Let me go back to this. See him holding that out there? As I'm speaking, this is again how natives demonstrated the truthfulness of their words. Because they regarded these deeds as kind of a sacred ritual. The beads themselves are made from two different types of marine shells. And this is a whelk shell, which is pretty common along the coast. And in that spiral area in the center there, let me see that. That's what native artisans would access in order to file down and drill a hole in the shell. This is again where all those European tools come in, right? You need files and needles and things like that. And all
This is where it comes from.
how they managed to make beads from these clam shells, that's really remarkable. The amount of hours it would take. I mean, there's probably thousands of beads in this cell, and this is really small. I mean, look at how big this one is. There's probably hundreds of thousands of beads in that element. So the amount of like labor and hours involved in this is just astounding. And the fact that Shawnees who do not live near the ocean are somehow getting these shells from the ocean, from the coast, in order to make waffle belts. The key thing to remember here is the designs are intended to spark your memory. They're mnemonic devices that enable a native person to say, yeah, this belt was woven when we talked to Philadelphia. And we agreed to this term here, principle, or we agreed to do X, Y, and Z. Did you have anything else you wanted me to talk about with?
And you were gonna mention that the names.
Oh, yes, okay. Yeah, Connie and I were talking about this earlier that, big takeaway for you all, I think, is, when you're talking about Native peoples, Indians, Native Americans, the best tactic is simply to if you can speak about a specific group, like the Shawnees, and not to generalize too much about, well, Indians do this or Indians do that. And that's why these names of particular peoples are important. And so Connie and I were chatting with lunch about yesterday, or maybe it's day one, I talked about Haudenosaunee, and that is the term that they prefer, because that's what they call themselves, the people of the Long House. The term that has come into more common usage is Iroquois. And one of the reasons that the Haudenosaunee object to the name Iroquois is that number one, it's not even a word in their language. The story of the origins of the word Iroquois is that it's an Algonquian word, and it means snake. So this is what the enemies of the Haudenosaunee were calling them. They were calling it snake, Iroquois, as the French heard it. So you can understand why a Haudenosaunee person would say, we're not snakes, we're not enemies. That term does not describe us at all. We're the Haudenosaunee, the people who belong to us. So always be attuned to how Native peoples refer to themselves. You can't go wrong. Okay.
Thank you. Five-minute break. in the bathroom. So, some of the seatbelts, we do a little bit around stuff, you can fly, type of thing. So anyway, what I do with, Mark and any of those pretty lifetime skill. My youngest daughter just finished her freshman year, and she told me her English professor was like, hey, how many of you just get it to me? Her 2 hands went up, and I'm like, oh my gosh. So, it is a form of note taking. It also slows down, makes sure it's in full reading. So when my kid finished fifth grade, and it's a year-long process, it's not just one time, they, are pretty good. Some of them are better than me, way better. So what we do is, what I tell them, I'm looking into the margin notes. I'm not the type of teacher that does assign questions at the end of the reading. To me, when you margin notes, I'm able to take a different and now slow their work. I'm able to see the article and get it from the extract information ideas. Well, anyway, and how the problem that we were. Now, here's one week, the whole week, young, right? So, and this is the mental. So we do talk about the importance, the way I do it, is I tell them, if you highlight something, you must enlarge only one. And that will keep them from highlighting the whole thing. First, I think that market will see more mental energy, like on website, that brain, and all of this highlighting is very passive. Rather than do lost my train of thought. Passive. They don't like, that's what I mean, they don't like, quite right, my margins. So on the watch is what this morning, 4:30, I was like, I'm out of it now. This is what I tell them. The easiest one is reactions. Not that they don't sit, and they don't give it nudge away from reactions, but that comes easy, right? Wow, yikes. Oh, that's so sad. Right? Those are just reactions. If you're interacting with the text, that's great. But not all of your market nodes should be reactions. Right? The next part is connections. So anytime connection, you do this probably in teaching, reading, right? Connect with the self, with facts, with the world. So making connections from one text to the other, something that it reminds you of. Making predictions, another thing, the margin notes, any question or wondering that too. Just question the name of the word, maybe question marks that teacher will actually give. Put a star and it's something that's important. Put a exclamation when you get something that surprises you. I kind of like for them to find a way to have it waste God. Find our own style of notating. So I don't really dictate how you're going to show this, but I want to see a variation of these type of notes in your margins. The only way I found it that fun, but you can check your journals, and reading, and of course not every paragraph when you go to happy for you to remember, why, why. And it's not going to be not going on, and the teacher will ask them, right? And that's it. And I get one book, and I'm like, and then I can show them what I'm at. I'm going to take books, right? And read my mark notes, and then I have to try to find this book. So I'm going to read it. Big anything. So I can give some that the why is very important. Throughout the process, and I work all year round with this, we spend time reflecting. We spend time reflecting, and I put the how on ways. Tell them just write in text language. Just want to write, you put the letter, you put you or two, it's TO symbols, bracket text, and like the headline, emojis. Some of my kids that are more visual and with the sketching will do visual notes. Another trick there is that they don't quit. I'm talking stick figures. Do not, there's some that think it's an elaborate piece of artwork that's not. We're moving there, right? Color coding, some kids, and a lot of brain research on the effectiveness of color coding. For your brain to recall and retain, right? Organize information. So I showed them George Washington's Constitution. George Washington was actually not a very good historian. He was not actually a very good an avid annotator, but when he was given the book, Constitution, when you go in there, he actually writes areas of the Constitution and write the president, so he can remember what his duties are. No one had ever done it. So, here. Portrait out there, it's about this. Because I didn't plan for this, and I'm just doing this because I heard it from your feedback. I have a similar paper chart to this in my class, so that I can always, but they were like, I don't want to write margins. We can always wait. And those are post-its that you can put in, take on and off. So this kind of gives them a framework and something useful in the classroom. They go point to when they go. And again, I have something similar to this in my classroom. Googled it this morning. But these are things, ways that they can annotate the text. Give them a lot of feedback too. And by feedback and reflection, I'll project what I did for homework, how I annotated the text. They pull out there, and you can think about it's one thing you can do that. It's one way that you can beat this up. And so they have these many goals along the year and how they can make it better. These are some of my annotations that I model the first 6 weeks. I'm modeling the entire time. I teach with, this is on computer, but I teach with an iPad and an Apple Pencil. So I'm reading the book and thinking out loud and annotating. I might stop and say, what would you put here? What would you annotate as a paragraph? That's what you've been doing the last couple of days. And if you notice, I have a variation of things like such, and just quick notes, and I'm highlighting one. I'm highlighting I also, when we did explore middle motivation hospital accomplishment, we explored what motivated them to explore, what obstacles. I teach you how to just cool things. So the long ones are hard to see the brightness. But anytime they tell motivation, they just throw it down on there. Or so I teach them like think of ways you can cool your text. The one on the right is actually a student that came back. It's great to show you great. They can put them in meditating. So that's actually the 10th grade as well. That you see the stick figures in there and the photography, the sections. So say it's like when I cut the umbilical cord after 6 weeks, they're just like, oh my, like they've never even considered and doing this. So the last school, I can tell them they don't have so many notes. That is not acceptable at this point. you need to come work with me, find me, let's sit down, and they do the time and sit and do that together. And then one-on-one, when there's this training for the kids. Because believe it or not, one of the struggle knows is these strong readers, they don't feel like they need to do this. So, the strong readers really resist me, but, so anyway. So I just wanted to share my, it's really important, the teachers that have them, like the sixth grade teachers, they really appreciate that they come and there's reading skills. All right, so project. We're going to do, it's going to be on one time, actually, over long time, so a few years ago, I was at the Smithsonian, play bell, it was so beautiful, and it's like, it's really pretty, so their version is trees. So, I thought we'd start full circle, this is where we started, in this board, and with a portrait analysis. And in front of you, you should have organized that exactly from the summary we have for the portrait. I did some pieces of them, and I love the way they walk you through things that you may not realize, the clothes, the dress, the hair. And so, if you, does anyone need one? Everyone get one? So I'm going to show an image that David actually shared with me. He had it in his PowerPoint on an image. And that's going to lay the groundwork for what we're going to do with the rom-com. And you see, we're going to analyze the image first. And then I don't know if you guys ever do 6-word memoirs or 6-word stories. So they're kind of fun to do. We're going to actually give the painting a 6-word story, basically. And so look at the bottom part of this. What words will most important to you? And consider like the prominent person painting, you're going to see. And you're going to organize the words. Almost like we did with the found just this work. You can't do one of these things. So let me go ahead and begin. I will website. This. Go ahead and the goal here is not to passively look, but to actively engage. So I hope you've gotten that in the last 3 days. That's what we've really been pushing is to actively. I think that here's full screen.
I just clicked the little magnifying glass thing.
Here.
Yep.
And then look at this expression, the setting, the whole picture, right? The whole picture. Just to get a setting with where we are with students, what they have on. Are the folders still in there? Did you find them?
I can't because now I'm screen sharing.
Maybe focusing on that, but also this around me. In the background. Yeah, the British that this is still scary today. Yeah. Right, I don't see it. Joy. I see it concern.
What's the GB on the blanket? The GB on the blanket, right there.
Oh. I didn't feel like blankets was their highest trading item either, when David shared that with us. You guys remember this?
You can see the influence of the times, like in the schools.
Yeah. So after you finish doing it, look at my sister story, for memoir, this scene. Yes, it is. What region of the US? Well,
There was one in the photograph that he showed earlier.
Was there?
Uh-huh.
And then the next piece is. The beauty is it's put down along the way, these type of trees, so they're not, they're locust, right?
Jefferson's speech was in Charlottesville in 1781. The title came up.
Anyone at the memoir piece? The story, anyone come up with something? We can compare. Now you have a lot, you have more background knowledge, right? Because we've spent 3 days, and David has been sharing about, so your short story, and now it's easier to tap into that, reservoir of knowledge that you gained within the last few days. To write some of the thoughts. Either the relationship with the comments or. The importance of the one head, the lost their land. You are going to do, then we'll do the wampum.
We're fine. They don't need that last time. Yeah, but if we need it, it's not far. 2.5.
Yeah. Anyone has to start recording? Okay, thank you. I'm gonna serious, influence, colonial. Long and language, like. But there's certain laws about another language. So in the middle of the table, you should have the ground view. Process when it's at the system in very in use that like this object investigation sheet. So if you look at this, step one, I think this is where really well most people get. Step one, you're going to put an object, you're going to sketch it. Step two, you're going to do this. Right? There's an operating, so you can see. And then three, something that you want to you on connection. And then the last step, is only going to talk to the and this is that for the problem. So what I did is the Smithsonian. So if you're going to be implementing a long time, and then like to get choice, you have just 7 different long you are going to help, you're going to be able to choose from. I just want you to choose one. This is something. So this is the side is the Smithsonian, and this here things for you. And you can see that the slides are here. The organizing of the viewer is here, the meeting is here. I've also had this video that explains the video to somebody here, and example that explains what the readings are. But what I want you to do is click on the page, select one to analyze more closely. This will give you a little bit more information that try to avoid one first, so that you're not and you can zoom in. Here, you'll also make there's 12 images in this. So some of them have like an index card. Tell you a little bit more information. Then you can zoom in. On some images more than others. And so you'll sketch it. Then you'll write what you observe. Any connections, any questions. And if you find that this wording within this program, then it's perfectly easy. We find these. I'm gonna have to the whole person disappeared, right? We can find it. There's 12 beads, there's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 things. Yes, we've got the word so I'm going to give you the QR code for this. Here, how do you do a whole person? I don't think they need to be. Did you find them? What are the
Solars?
and if you don't say the I noticed that there was something in there that totally threw me off. Okay, so you can bring this on.
I'm gonna steal them back later today, don't worry. I can't do it while I'm free in here.
There's a colony. It's not, oh, it's not in, I'll put it in the folder. I'll do it right now.
Yeah, when it's my phone, just go here.
Did you pull it? Do you have the power to take it out?
That one's recent.
Oh, not while you're.
If you put that thing back up.
Actually,
Get there.